Season 2 of Warzone 2 is finally out, and today I'm sharing with you the best graphics settings for it. And we start with on-demand texture streaming. The natural instinct with this is to turn it on and have the highest quality images that you can. However, I'm going to tell you to turn it off, and that's simply because turning it on sometimes actually leads to visual bugs. And on top of that, we want to use our bandwidth as much as possible to lower our ping and minimize lag. And really, the local textures on the main download of the game are just fine. Then we come down to world and weapon motion blur, turn these both off. These settings kind of add to the cinematics of the game when you play, so they can look cool, but they actually obstruct our view a lot of the time, meaning that we see an enemy a few milliseconds slower than we otherwise would. And similar can be said of film grain, but not to the same extent, but I still recommend turning this down to 0. I mean, even Call of Duty here have described it as visual noise, and that's something we can do without, so get it to 0. Depth of field, also turn that off. When this is on, it just makes the area around your aim appear a little bit blurry. But just like we did with the other settings, we want them off so we can see as much as we can and get as much information as possible. Then as we come down to Fidelity FX CAS, I recommend having this on and turning the strength up to between 50 and 100 depending on your console. So this setting just simply sharpens the images on your screen. And thankfully this doesn't put a load on our systems in terms of processing that information, because if it did, that would lower our frames per second, and obviously we don't want that. But for my Xbox Series X, for whatever reason, actually the images seemed kind of blurry. So I put this setting on and maxed it out to 100 to have those sharp, clean images, but I would have a little play around with it yourself to see how you like it. Then as we come down, obviously if you do have the option for 120Hz refresh rate, turn that on, as that essentially means 120 frames per second is enabled. For that you'll need a system that can handle it, so the newer generations of consoles, and a monitor that can handle it as well. For field of view, this is a little subjective, but I've got mine on 120. This just allows us to see as much as possible around us. The only downside to putting it on 120 is that enemies at a distance can appear much smaller, but with a good scope on your weapon, that really doesn't matter too much. Then as we click show more and see a couple more settings, we have ADS field of view. Now we want this on affected. That means that when we aim in, we have the same field of view as our main setting. If you have it on independent, your field of view goes back to 80. Then for weapon field of view, I recommend putting it on wide. As the description says, this makes the weapon look smaller, and that's great for us because that means we can see more of the environment around us. Then for third person field of view, I've maxed this one out as well, and that maxes out at 90. For camera movement, for both first person and third person, we want to put this on least, which is 50%. Again, this is one of those settings which is very cinematic, and maybe when you're playing campaign is quite fun, but when you're getting a little competitive on Warzone and you want to just win games, you want to see people and the environment as clear as possible and maybe not get seasick. If you do play third person, I recommend putting the third person ADS transition on third person ADS. That just means you don't swap to first person when you aim in. It's super trippy and actually slows you down a little bit. Spectating doesn't matter too much. Then for brightness, actually I haven't gone too crazy with this, it's just on 55. Modern Warfare 2 and Warzone 2 are fairly well lit, so there's not much we need to do here. In terms of safe area, I recommend you go as narrow as possible. So this just refers to your HUD and information on the screen. Your instinct may be to push these all the way to the side, but this pushes important information to the edges of your screen, such as the minimap. And really you want to minimize the amount you track your eyes into the corner to look at your minimap to the center of your screen where you're aiming at people. The more that distance is, the more you're gonna have to move your eyes up and down and potentially miss people. So by going as narrow as possible, that minimizes that. Okay, now we want to move over to interface for the final set of graphics settings. Many of these are personal choice, but I do recommend changing your color customization. Obviously on console, we don't have as many options to change things like this as PC players do. However, these color filters offer a quick and easy way to change the whole color palette of the game. I recommend Filter 2 as it just makes important features on the game pop that little bit more. And then we can put the target on both and the intensity all the way up to 100. And if you ever have problems seeing your teammates' pings or even your own, you can actually change the color of them right here. For subtitles, I recommend putting these all on. This gives you a little bit more information on what the enemy is doing as well as your teammates. Sometimes if an enemy is nearby and they do something like throw a frag or take a bullet, it. Their characters will say something which you might not quite hear, but the subtitles will pick them up. Then you know someone is near and you can act accordingly. I'm gonna assume you've got your minimap shape on square. I really hope you do. If you haven't, get it on now. You can see about 25% more than you otherwise would. A lot of these other settings you can leave on default, so they're not super important, but I would recommend turning on your center dot, although the size of which doesn't matter too much. This is great to put on to assist your centering, especially if you get flashed or stunned. Hopefully these settings have helped you out and improve your chances of winning next time you play Warzone 2 or Modern Warfare 2. And now that you've got these settings nailed, why don't you check out these videos that cover the best controller settings and the best audio settings?